me control something in my relationship for once.
Hold up. Chrissy, that's not a way for you to treat somebody's mother.
I'm not marrying you.
You are the selfish bitch. That's how I feel.
Oh, and what are you?
I'm not so.
Jim Jones sat down for a personal and reflective interview as he got ready to talk about a difficult period in his life. Because he was embarrassed by what had happened, he had avoided talking about it in public for so long, even though he knew that this was a subject that many people had been speculating about for years. The day he slapped his fiancée, Chrissy Lampkin. He thought the time had come to explain what had actually transpired and why things had gotten out of hand. He sincerely regretted the choice, which had bothered him ever since Jim began his story by outlining the escalating tensions between Chrissy and Rashid Jones, his sister. Jim says it started with Chrissy making a serious accusation that Rashid had stolen money from her, and it was enough to start a firestorm. Jim, who believed he knew his sister well and couldn't imagine that she would betray him in this way, found it difficult to comprehend Chrissy's conviction that Rashid had stolen the money. Rashid was in charge of the missing money, which led to a strained atmosphere in their house. Jim found himself in a challenging position where he had to choose between two women who held immense personal significance for him. His sister, Rashi, was someone he had grown up with and implicitly trusted, while his fiancée, Chrissy, was wounded, defensive, and hesitant to adjust their stance. Jim felt as though he were being torn apart from the inside out. Jim recalled Chrissy and Rashid's heated confrontations, which were loud, emotional, and filled with accusations. The scene got tense, and he grew increasingly upset at his inability to arbitrate between them. He felt stuck, unable to reconcile the lady he loved with the sister he had always stood by, and every effort he made to ease the tensions just made them worse. The day that everything changed then arrived. Jim vividly remembered the argument that escalated more quickly than he had anticipated. That particular day, Chrissy was furious and lashed out, accusing Rashid of stealing the money again. In response, Rashid defended herself from the accusations. Jim, standing between them, tried to explain again, but Chrissy wasn't having any of it because she was feeling too strongly. Jim's emotions became uncontrollable as something inside of him broke. Jim lifted his hand and gave Chrissy a slap in the middle of the debate. He had never thought he was capable of such a thing, and the instant his hand touched her, he recognized the magnitude of what he had done. Time seemed to stop, and all he could feel was regret as the shame struck him instantly. After the slap, everyone in the room grew silent as the realization of what had just transpired set in. He had crossed a line that should never be crossed, and the realization that followed was devastating. Jim would never forget the shocked, hurt, and betrayed expression on Chrissy's face. Jim struggled with the consequences of his behavior. The episode quickly became well-known, garnering media coverage and social media discussion. Although everyone had an opinion, no one was aware of the entire situation or the psychological suffering that had led up to it. Jim felt terrible about what he had. Jim also said that the charges against Rashid had never been fully resolved. It was never made clear if the money had been stolen or if there had been a misunderstanding. The family was permanently damaged by the tension that never really went away between Chrissy and Rashid. But Jim believed that repairing his connection with Chrissy, whom he put a lot of effort into, was the most crucial thing. Working diligently to restore the trust that had been betrayed that day was challenging, and the road to recovery was long and excruciating. In retrospect, Jim said he deeply regretted what he had done. More than ever, he understood how quickly feelings might spiral out of control and how a fit of wrath could do irreversible damage. By telling his experience, Jim hoped that people would note his faults and avoid making the same choices he did. Although Jim was aware that no amount of justification could erase the past, he felt determined to do better, take lessons from the incident, and ensure that it doesn't happen again. Although the event had been a difficult and regrettable period in Jim's life, it also taught him the need for accountability, forgiveness, and managing one's emotions before they cause irreparable harm. The most important thing at this time was to go on, grow as a man, and continue to strengthen his bonds with those he loved.
With a smile on your face, like everything is a joke too. Your mother was getting a massage, and Zeke was getting a lap dance in my backyard. Why? Because you make them feel like it's okay.
As the days passed, the stress only grew. Jim recalled the arguments that broke out between Chrissy and Rashid. They were noisy, heated, and full of accusations. Things became tense, and he grew increasingly frustrated at his inability to mediate between them each time. He felt powerless to heal the relationship between the lady he loved and the sister he had always defended, as his attempts to defuse the situation only seemed to stir the flames. The day that everything changed then came, and Jim recalled the heated argument. When Chrissy was. That day, she is particularly angry and snaps, accusing Rashid of stealing the money again. In response, Rashid defended herself from the accusation. Jim, positioned between them, tried again to defuse the situation, but she was feeling too strongly. Chrissy continued to pursue the issue. Jim's emotions were out of control when something inside of him exploded. Jim would live to regret the split-second decision that resulted from his irritation, anger, and powerlessness. During the ferocity of the dispute, Jim realized the seriousness of what he had done as his palm contacted Chrissy. The shame hit him immediately since he had never believed he was capable of such a thing. He felt nothing but regret, as if time had stopped.
He does have that mean little streak, you know, and I...
Come in. How you doing?
How are you?
Jim remembered the look of surprise, pain, and betrayal on Chrissy's face. The fact that he had crossed a line that ought never to have been crossed will always be with him. After the slap, everyone in the room fell silent as the realization of what had just happened set in. B crossed, and the ensuing disclosure was devastating. Jim struggled with the consequences of his behavior. The episode quickly became well known, garnering media coverage and social media discussion. Everybody had an opinion, but nobody knew the whole truth about the story. They had no idea how much mental turmoil had preceded that moment, or even though Jim felt terrible about what he had done, he understood that his actions were unacceptable regardless of his background because he had hurt a loved one and would have to face the consequences. Further admitted that it was still unclear if the money had been stolen or if there had been a misunderstanding, and that the charges against Rashid had never been fully resolved. Chrissy and Rashid's hostility never truly subsided, leaving a long-term harm to the family, but Jim's top priority was mending his relationship with Chrissy. Although he worked hard to restore the confidence that had been betrayed that day, the process was difficult and time-consuming.
Let me control something in my relationship for once.
Hold up. Chrissy, that's not a way for you to treat somebody's mother.
I'm not marrying you.
You are the selfish bitch. That's how I feel.
Oh, and what are you?
I'm not so...
Jim reflected on the past and sincerely regretted his actions, understanding more than ever how easily emotions can spiral out of control and how an angry outburst might lead to irreversible damage. He hoped that by sharing his story, others would recognize his shortcomings and avoid making the same choices he did. Jim saw there was no way to defend what happened, but he was determined to get better, take what he had learned, and ensure that it didn't happen again. Jim had gone through a challenging time in his life following the tragedy, one that was full of sadness and remorse, but it also served as a lesson in accountability, forgiving others, and the importance of controlling one's emotions before they caused Jim irreparable harm. He had to continue to grow as a person and strengthen his bonds with those he cared about.